Hello, welcome to the Officially Spotlight podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb, and thank you very much for listening. Today, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Andrew Newnham. Andrew is presently the CPO at Marks & Spencer's, where he's been since 2019. Prior to that, he spent nearly 10 years at ITV as Director of Business Efficiency and Group Procurement, and he's also previously had roles at UBS Investment Bank and Vodafone. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. As a starting point, I thought you're clearly a very experienced leader in our industry, and you're presently CPO at what must be one of certainly the UK's most recognisable retail brands. But as we're recording this, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, inflation, etc. I'm really interested to understand what that means for someone like you in the hot seat in such a big retailer.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's a good question. It's the hottest topic in the industry that is most affected probably by the whole macroeconomic issues that we've got in the country, or arguably in the world at the moment. I remember us prepping for this call and we were talking about what things were hot and what were my issues and what were my challenges at the moment. And, it's funny because it's very circular. At the moment, it's all about savings. We've got a 400 million target as a business to take off the bottom line. We've actually had just announced a really good set of results.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, the old saying, this is the time when the weather's good, fix the roof. And that's where we are really. As an internal business, we've got 9 key tenets of our strategy, of our plan for growth going forward. And number one on that is deliver a structurally lower cost base.
Right.
So that's number one on M&S's priorities at the moment, above everything. That shows you that we've just got that kind of laser focus on how we keep a lid on inflation, how we get best value for our customers, how we make sure that our P&L reduces over time.
Interestingly, we record a lot of these podcasts with CPOs like yourselves. Weirdly, savings isn't necessarily a topic that comes up that often, right? I'd be interested in your perspective in our industry, whether it's almost fallen out of fashion a little bit. And now's actually the time when procurement professionals are really coming into their own, right?
It's interesting, okay, because if you look at the M&S procurement strategy, we almost don't use the word savings.
Right.
You're right, it's not trendy, and it's almost the opposite. It's trendy to say we're moving beyond savings, we're doing something different, and we're measuring our value through all these different measures. And I've been to a few breakfast meetings where we've had discussions like that. But I do think, and again, this is a conversation I've had with a few people, that's okay, but you have to do the basics well. And actually, in the current environment, macroeconomic environment, the CFO at M&S, first thing he wants to ask me about is savings.
Yeah.
The first thing he wants to know is, what savings are we going to deliver? Then he wants to know where we're going to deliver them from. Then he wants to know the process by which we make sure they come off the bottom line and aren't just almost re-spent on something else if we make savings. And that is, I think, the prudent thing to do at the moment. I think as a business with a rich history and a rich brand, we can't overlook the fact that we need to keep ourselves competitive. And if we look at our cost base, we need to keep it competitive as a business. The last few years are littered with very historic, rich brands that are no longer in business because they didn't do that.
Yeah,
actually, and it's the right thing to do. And I think that when you look at the procurement strategy at M&S, we talk about commercial mindset, which is basically savings. We talk about maximizing performance, which is basically through the lifetime of the contract, making sure you get value for money and you avoid value leakage. But then we're focusing as well on what we call alternative thinking, which is, how do we look more widely at the cost base in the business? How do we look at business efficiency? How we change business process? How we look at things differently to take cost out of the business? While we don't spend all of our time just talking about savings in our strategy, it is actually, when you boil it down, we're in the procurement team. We should be about reducing cost as a business. I don't think any procurement director, CPO, should make an apology for that.
No, and Andrew, when you talk about getting the basics right, what does that mean for you, either in your team now or in previous roles that you've had?
I think as a team at M&S, and I'm proud of this, we should be known as the team who are the best negotiators in the business.
Yeah.
You can talk about everything, fundamentally bring in a rigor and a process and a science to negotiation to ensure that you're getting the best value for money every time you agree a contract with a third party. That's the nub of what I think doing the basics is. I always tell the team we should be easy to do business with, but tough to negotiate with. That's fundamentally it. And then everything flows from that. Okay, you need to have a robust process for measuring savings. I was listening to a previous podcast talking about a business that was doing a 7-year deal and claiming savings for 7 years. You know, that sort of thing gets the procurement brand a bad name. So you need a good, robust process for that. You need a really good team of people that integrate with the business. We're not some kind of ivory tower that sits on our own. The biggest compliment I always get from FDs or from directors in the business is, you know, your team feels like one of our team.
Yeah.
Not that we should be going native. That's the kind of wrong end of the spectrum. We should be challenging, but we should be seen as somebody who helps them deliver their objectives. So I think they're the basics. You're great at negotiation. You understand sourcing. You absolutely clear on the data and how you measure your success. And then you get a team that has the skills to be able to influence and make a difference to the way the business is run. I think if you get those things in place, then you can talk about all the things on top.
Yeah. Going back to the idea of savings, you mentioned to me when you first joined M&S, you brought the savings down. I was really interested in that because you were very passionate about the savings being real and that being more important than the number being big. I was just interested to get your thoughts on that.
That's absolutely right. So when I joined M&S, after the first year of me being here, our savings were sort of 40% lower than they were the year before I came. And that's because we were absolutely clear about what a saving was. We're absolutely clear about the fact that it affects the bottom line of the business. It should be, you know, OPEX affecting. Things like cost avoidance are important, and actually they can be a proxy for the value you've added as a procurement team. Fundamentally, it's this year and taking money out of the budget this year that actually what that people care about, especially when you're in retail, especially if you think about the years that I've been at M&S. We had a nice year, then we had COVID, and it's been pretty bumpy ride since then. So actually, again, I don't really apologize for doing things in a robust way and thinking about the short term. Otherwise, there might not be a long term.
Yeah.
You know, Keynes said in the long run, we're all dead. And that's right, isn't it? You know, worry about here and now. And I feel like it's glib, but I don't really apologize for making that point. I think there are, you know, I'm going to say the same thing I said earlier, that one of the reasons sometimes a procurement brand has a bad name in certain businesses is that kind of stretching savings rather than having real savings, that people really appreciate that you added value. Yeah, I am passionate about that. That's one of the first things I did when I joined the team, is almost set up a mini team within our procurement team to say, right, we need to do this better. And actually, you know, what I'd say about that, Simon, is, I mean, this isn't great, but I've had 4 bosses since I've been at M&S, 4 CFOs. Right. Not great in itself. But the first thing they've all done is say to me, how do you measure your savings?
Yeah.
Every one of them wants to know that finance approve and we have a robust process for measuring savings.
Presumably you felt that by going into someone like M&S, bringing the savings down, I assume was a difficult conversation, but it's ultimately that helped your credibility within the business. So you are a stronger CPO now that everyone recognizes that if you're calling it as a saving, it's coming out the bottom line, right?
I think we're totally as stronger as a team. You know, it's not about me, right? So we're a stronger a team. And the reason for that is everybody recognizes that when we put numbers on a page, we write a paper for approval at the PLC or for the CEO, the numbers we put on there have credibility and they're real. And actually, I prefer them to be low and real.
Yeah.
You can do what you can do. You know, in an inflationary environment, we need to be realistic about our targets. But actually, our return on investment is still over 15 to 1 on the cost of the procurement team. You know, I think we do a good job. And again, that comes back to, we have a relentless focus on cost transformation. We have a relentless focus on being the best negotiators. We always try and get people who understand the category and really understand the market they're buying in, and who can influence stakeholders. If you do those things, you can then build on things like the alternative thinking, the thing we're trying to push forward as a team in the business. That only can be done if you get those kind of building blocks in place.
Yeah. And did you feel that the immediacy of retail, the smaller margins, the immediacy of the impact and the cost, do you have to establish those good procurement behaviours in the industry? Yeah. Presumably, because if you didn't, you wouldn't last very long, right? Whereas in other industries, you might have a little bit more leeway, right?
I think that's fair. I think one of the things I quite often am also heard to say is that I think it's too easy to talk about procurement as if there's one way.
Yeah.
There isn't one way. There's one way that works at the business you're in. What you have to do is almost sit down and go, right, what actually do M&S need from us?
Yeah.
What does the CFO need? What does the business need? What do they want from us? And how are we going to best set ourselves up? Write a strategy, write a procurement purpose, get the right people to deliver that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm not sitting here as a CPO of GSK or of Unilever, and it might be very different if I was, and I might have very different opinions, and I might have a very different strategy and
Yeah.
very different ways of measuring success. And that's right. Fundamentally, that is right. But I don't. I work in retail with low margins, with massive economic headwinds,
Yeah.
and with competitors going bust right, left, and centre. And you have to know that and act on that basis. And that's almost like, when we recruit people, we spend a lot of time on cultural fit, because retail's more fast moving, a little bit more cutthroat, and you need to be quick on your decision making and be prepared to make decisions.
Yeah.
Honestly, not everybody can cut it. You come in from a consultancy, or you come in from a utility, and you're used to doing, I'm going to do this 9 months process. No. In 9 months, we've done 9 processes. What I'm not saying is it's right or wrong. I'm just saying you get the best process because you need a certain output in the business you're in, not because it's the right process.
Yeah. We touched on the start. You've had a very broad, long career. You've worked in a Vodafone, you've worked in an investment bank, you've worked in a media company. So I guess in that sense, you've got the long view. I mean, I'm just interested in your perspective on the industry, maybe what CPOs get wrong that they should be doing differently, what your experience has taught you if someone listening to this is perhaps a bit newer into CPO role, about what they should be doing to get this right.
Yeah, I think this might sound a bit oversimplified, but firstly, you need to spend a lot of time listening. Comes back to my point about what procurement is right for the business that you're working in.
Yeah.
You need to really understand the strategy of the business and actually of each individual division or business unit. And you need to be clear about how you are going to help them deliver that. I think this is less true now. I think in the past, there was a tendency to go, this is what procurement should be.
Yeah.
Here's my balanced scorecard. I'm going to bring it with me from the company that I used to work in. This is what we're going to do. And that may or may not work, right? But it may not work. That's the point. It goes back to it's the same point I was making on recruitment. There are good people out there that might not be good people at M&S.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. We just need to make sure that we don't choose those people. So, and it's the same, it doesn't mean that the procurement strategy is wrong. It means it won't work at this business. And I think that just understanding what you're about as a business, what your purpose should be as a procurement team, and then being single-minded about delivering it and not overreacting to bumps in the road, because nobody's going to agree, by the way. Not everybody in the business is going to like it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it will cause a little bit of conflict. If you're right, be single-minded about it. The team may or may not like it, depending on their history. If you're right, and I think that's what I did here was, it was very different in terms of much closer to finance, much closer to the business, much less reliant on process, much more rigorous in terms of the data we were using when I joined than it was before. Yeah. And lots of the team were like, that's not what I think we should do. But sometimes it's your job as a leader to lead. And consensus is important, and it is important to especially get some people who really understand the business on side with you and learn from them.
Yeah.
But it is fundamentally, you have to lead sometimes, and you have to do what you think is right. It's maybe a little bit oversimplistic, but too many people worry about too much about what other people are doing and not about what they believe in.
Yeah. Pretty cool for the podcast. The other thing you talked about, which I thought was really, really interesting, was we started talking about this idea of procurement transformations. And I'm assuming in your career, you've presided over a number, you've seen lots of them, right? But you made a really interesting point about there's lots of focus on that transformation, but not so much in your experience of focus on afterwards, right? Making that sustainable. And I think you said that, one of your objectives in going into M&S is, if you were to leave, for it to be a sustainable business. You were saying the CPOs often come in 3 years and move on. I'm really interested in your perspective on that. I've not heard people talk too much about that idea.
It's easy, right? To come in, when you're new, you get given a bit of budget, you get given the ability to change. You probably get a bit of leeway on moving people in and out, and you go, right, we'll set up the strategy in the first year, we'll get the right tools in the second year, formulate the team in the third year, it's all set up. But actually, and this happened to me, I think, both at M&S and at ITV, actually. When I was at ITV, it felt like the procurement team there was almost like built on sand,
Right.
and it wasn't set up. And I'm not saying that when I left, my successor didn't change things. They absolutely would, partly because the business moves on, partly because they'll have their own way of doing things, and that's all fine. But fundamentally, everybody thought the procurement team was good. Everybody thought the procurement team had a place. Everybody understood the role of the procurement team at ITV. Whereas I don't think that was true before I joined ITV.
Right.
And, the same at M&S, right? You find your place. And then when I leave here, they'll recruit somebody or they'll promote somebody. That person, again, they'll have their own ideas and they'll change some things. But we are rock solid in our foundations as part of the business and in our role in the business. We're relevant. This is our role. This is what we do. And we can have a debate about whether that's right or not, but fundamentally that no one's going to be like, well, do we need those guys? Or we should spend another few million quid on another transformation after 3 years. And actually, even when I joined M&S, there were lots of things right. These guys did loads of good things.
Yeah.
They run a negotiation skills course where they actually teach a lot of the rest of the business basics of negotiation. That wasn't me that set that up. We carried it on. Sometimes it's about evolution. Sometimes it's about these things are very good. We should carry on doing them and then build on the other things.
Yeah.
So I do think that's right. I do think there's too much focus. Transformation is the kind of, apart from partnership, the most overused word in the procurement dictionary, probably the business dictionary.
Yeah.
And it's lost its meaning. And I actually think that what you should be doing is trying to build something from the ground up slowly with strong foundations so that when you walk away, you feel like there's something built there. It's going to change a little bit like everything, but there's something solid there. Yeah. And I think that all too often somebody leaves, it all gets thrown up in the air.
Yeah.
I feel like that's how I measure my success. Didn't happen at ITV when I left. It didn't get thrown up in the air. They've definitely changed some things over there, and by the sounds of it, for the better.
Yeah.
It will be the same here. It won't be like, well, do we need these guys?
Yeah.
That won't be a conversation.
Procurement, there's kind of topics that come in and out. There are certain trends, like anything, right? One of those would be procurement technology. So I'll just throw that out there. I'd love to get your perspective on that one.
Well, I presented at the SIPS conference a month or so ago, 6 weeks ago. I was talking about procurement strategy and I was talking about alternative thinking. One of the things I said was, I feel like technology, it's another thing that people overplay.
Yeah.
No CFO I've ever worked for has asked me what technology I used.
Yeah.
He asked me what my objectives are, or she. They asked me about, what I'm going to deliver, how we're going to measure it, and asked me how we're engaging the business. I mean, I think that's what we sometimes do with the technology. It's like, it's some kind of panacea. It's not, it's a tool that you use for data and for process, for business workflows, fine. And maybe for a bit of control actually as well. There's nothing wrong with that. But technology is important and you need to get it right, but only so it doesn't encumber the team too much.
Yeah.
It should help the team do their job. At the point where the team are not as efficient as they could be because the technology used, or we haven't got the right data because of technology we use, it should be in the background. In my mind, the technology is in the back. It's in the background. Successful procurement technology is something that the rest of the business doesn't even know you use.
Yeah.
Not what you're known for. We're known for delivering this piece of technology. Well done. It's the wrong emphasis.
Wrong emphasis. The other one, Andrew, ESG, environmental issues.
Look, I think ESG is clearly the most important challenge issue that the world and the UK faces at the moment.
Yeah.
I think it's very tough when you're in a cost of living crisis and you've got a business that you've got to keep profitable.
Yeah.
And all the positives that has for both its employees and its shareholders and all those things.
Yeah.
It's just getting the right balance. And we as a business taking the Plan A strategic initiative, M&S, is, I think, quite widely known as a bit of a groundbreak when it first was built. And it's clearly really important, but I think it's almost like you've got to do it in conjunction with all the other things that are really important.
Yeah.
We're putting together our plan for net zero this year for GNFR. We've really, at M&S, if you look at the clothing and home and the food side, which I don't manage, they're very well established in terms of their net zero credentials.
Yeah.
GNFR has had less focus just because it isn't the area that really impacts the business emissions target. But this year is a real big thing for us to get ourselves a good space in that area, properly measuring it, properly have a strategy, properly have a vision, and work with some of our suppliers to start delivering that vision. It's really important.
Yeah.
But what I found really interesting is when I've been doing some benchmarking, when I've been looking at how other companies are doing this, there aren't that many really good examples of companies doing groundbreaking stuff. There's a lot of slideware out there.
Yeah.
And not so much real change being delivered. I'm the sort of person that if we're going to do it, we're going to do something real rather than put a good slide deck together.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to do it unless we're going to do something real and actually change some things at M&S and work with our suppliers to make a difference. To me, that should be the priority, not going to conferences and talking about it. I'm
also just really interested. So as you say, you leader in our industry, have been for a long time. As you kind of look forward to whatever next 3 to 5 years, either what's your focus in M&S or generally, where do you think our industry is going?
I've almost mentioned a couple of times the point on our strategy about alternative thinking. I've talked also a lot about getting the foundations right, getting the basics right, and I think that is absolutely right. But then we do have to, as an industry, think about where we take procurement. And I do think it's got to be more about changing structurally process. It's got to be more about really understanding the market and the industry. I loosely talk with my team about, or certainly the senior leaders in my team, about how we become almost an internal consultancy group.
Right.
What should we do? What ideas do we have? How are we going to impact next year's budget? And how are we going to do that by more than just negotiating inflation down? Negotiating inflation down is really important.
Yeah.
What are we going to do differently?
Yeah.
How are we going to influence the business to do that differently? And I actually think we've done some really good work on product packaging, where we worked with the supplier, changed the process, changed the commercial model, brought in some of the resources on the creative side, moved the ownership from one part of the business to another part of the business because it just felt the right thing, changed all the handovers and met within the contract and between the different departments and the team. So it's a much bigger thing than just, well, we've got a good deal. We've done an audit. We've changed the way the business runs a small part of its key, but small part of its proposition. That is a really good example of something that I think that we are going to really look for opportunities to do.
Yeah.
You can't do it without credibility. You can't do it without the right people. But I think it is one of those things. The Food FD has been so impressed with the work we've done, and it is more than just savings. We'll all end up trying to be at that end of the value chain. Because if we're not, that's when technology becomes, there's AI systems out there now that will do negotiations for you.
Yeah.
Take a little bit of setup. It's got to be about ideas.
Yeah.
It's got to be about ideas and thinking. That's where we've got to start playing.
Andrew, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's a fascinating conversation, really, really helpful. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat to me.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a click on the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also love to hear your views on either future topics or indeed if you've got any thoughts on future guests that we should look to get into the podcast. Thanks again. See you next time.